Well, today on the program, we're going to talk to you about the 5 reasons why you should still be contributing to your employer retirement plan despite the COVID pandemic. Plus, have you checked your sock drawer lately? Maybe there's some gift cards in there. We're going to talk to you today about why it's going to be important for you to check out those gift cards that may be buried in that sock drawer. Plus, the latest on the payroll protection plan forgiveness. They passed another big bill in Washington this past week that updated a lot of the terms, made it a little bit easier to get that loan forgiveness. So we'll recap all of that on the program. Welcome to Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of those different decisions that have anything and everything to do with dollars. My name is Joel Garris. I'm with Nelson Financial Planning. I'm a certified financial planner, a certified financial fiduciary of Nelson Financial Planning, where our team of certified financial fiduciaries helps you achieve your dreams by having a successful financial plan. The program is Dollars and Cents. We happen to be Central Florida's longest running radio program. Listened to on both the News Radio WFLA Orlando network and now the 96.9 The Game network. Also, one of the top 25 financial planning podcasts on the World Wide Web. Over 10,000 downloads of our podcast at last count. So that's pretty exciting. So welcome. So let's dig right straight into it. A bit of a surprise in terms of the numbers that came out on Friday. We're able to actually do this show Sunday morning. For the past few weeks, we've been doing it on Thursday morning because of the COVID pandemic limiting access to the studio. We're still not quite in the studio, but at least our producer, Tom, is there. And so we are doing it on Sunday, which means that we get to talk about what happened on Friday. And of course, what happened on Friday was certainly some pretty significant employment data that came out, that showing that there was actually in the month of May a creation of 2.5 million jobs with an unemployment rate that actually fell to 13.3%. Surprising data because the vast majority of folks out there, economists, thought that the unemployment rate was going to be above 19% with the loss of 8 million jobs. Instead, it was a net shift of about 10.5 million. So kind of crazy how widely off the data could be for unemployment. Obviously, the market responded to that incredibly positively because of such a big disparity. And I guess that's just a testament of the times that we're in. A lot of uncertainty, whether it's about COVID or whether it's about the social issues as well. Certainly, the market paid a lot more attention to the unemployment data this past week. Really, despite the tragic killing of George Floyd and the political resulting unrest and protests that were taking place throughout the country. I happen to live in downtown Orlando and happened to go on my run yesterday and go past the area of City Hall, and there were a good amount of folks out there protesting their very, very valid points in today's society, and certainly the police were there as well for crowd control and those kinds of things. And kind of what struck me is that how peaceful those protests were, because obviously folks are making some very valid points, the things that institutionally need to change in today's world. And it struck me that all it takes is a few bad apples, right? A few bad apples. The vast majority of folks that are police officers or sheriff's deputies or the like are good people trying to do their job and keep our communities safe. Similarly, the vast majority of the protesters are trying to make their point known. And let's face it, that's what this country was founded on. Unfortunately, few bad apples among some police forces, and for that matter, few bad apples among the protesters that are taking advantage of looting and criminal activity. Really kind of spoils it for everybody else. So unfortunately, I do have to feel blessed that I live in Orlando. I think Orlando, the community is certainly a pretty big community, and we're getting bigger every day. And the reality is that we've been able to be very peaceful on the protests, because we've certainly had some tough times in this community before. But I just wanted to take a moment and applaud not just the civic leaders that are organizing these protests, but the government officials and leadership there that are helping these protests occur in a peaceful manner. So just a big thumbs up to the city. Beautiful across the board. It is certainly interesting to see just how much sort of the markets do focus on the raw economic data, and certainly that played out this past week with these surprising unemployment numbers that ultimately led to a market going up by about 5% for the week. So if you're keeping score, or maybe you've stopped keeping score because you were worried about what the value of your accounts might be, I would encourage you to take a look at those numbers, because the reality is that the markets as a whole are up about 45% just in the space of just over a couple of months from that low that happened back on March 23rd. And in fact, the broad-based markets measured by the S&P 500 are down just under 6.5% from the all-time peak. So some pretty staggering numbers when you look at what's going on in the market. Be careful though, because that it does not show the full breadth, if you will, of what's happening across corporate America, because a lot of what is driving the markets is the very narrow segment of tech and technology companies. Those companies have seen a massive increase in their business with everybody working remotely and needing more secure connections and greater bandwidth and needing to buy stuff online. And so consequently, you've seen those companies do well, where there's still a much larger swath of companies that are still sort of struggling. And I think that's kind of the key point, or the key takeaway if you're sort of looking at the market these days, is it's great that it has recovered and bounced up as much as it has, but it is way too early to call the all clear on this by any stretch of the imagination. There's still a rapid increase in the number of cases of COVID. Certainly the treatments may have gotten a little bit more effective and better as we learn more about this disease, but there's still an increase in the number of cases. There's still a lot of businesses trying to come back online. And so those types of things are still weighing out there, and we think that there will still be much volatility ahead, especially as the impact of having that many folks unemployed starts to take hold in the economy, particularly when you're looking at consumer spending. So way too early to say all clear. Market may be getting a little bit ahead of itself here. So the reality is, bottom line, stay consistent, but be prepared for volatility. When we get back, we're going to shift gears and talk to you about some of the reasons why, even during a pandemic, that you want to continue on with contributing to your employer plan, here on Dollars and Cents on News Radio WFLA Orlando 96.9 The Game. Welcome back to Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. My name is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner and certified financial fiduciary with Nelson Financial Planning, where our team of certified financial fiduciaries is ready to help you become successful with your financial plan so that you can get guidance for the future. on this segment of the program, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that you need to be considering if you are contributing to a employer retirement plan, combined with the fact that your employer retirement plan is a great option for you to be contributing money. But the question we get is, well, it's during a pandemic. I'm concerned about those types of things that are in fact happening. And so maybe I want to stop and not do that anymore. And so before we kind of get into the reasons why, let's recap how those types of plans work, right? So with an employer-sponsored plan, the ability to contribute money is relatively easy. It comes out of your paycheck automatically. You can elect whether the particular tax advantages that you want, and so there's a couple of options there to think about, combined with the fact that it becomes an extra amount of money that you can certainly use during the course of your retirement. So those are kind of the general concepts of what an employer-sponsored type of plan looks like. There's different options out there. There's traditional 401ks or 403bs or even deferred compensation plans, 457 types of plans. And there's no real limit to the amount of money that you can put into it. You can start out small, as little as a few dollars a paycheck on up. There is some maximum limits, and so folks that do those, obviously they're really putting a lot towards their retirement. The numbers for this year, for 2020, 19,500 is the limit if you're under 50. If you're over 50, you can put a maximum of 26,000 in. So obviously some big numbers that you can contribute to along the way, and so consequently those are some significant amount of contributions that you can make. So now you've kind of got the background on what an employer-sponsored type of plan would be. The reality is that there's a lot of reasons why, even now, and even in the midst of all of this economic catastrophe as a result of the COVID pandemic, why you really want to try and still make those contributions on a regular basis. First, it really is a great supplement to retirement, right? I mean, if you're just banking on Social Security or maybe a pension, if you're fortunate, then that is fine, but that is money that just comes in on a monthly basis and doesn't really have the option for you to draw out chunks of money to fix a leaky roof or something along those lines. So having a retirement account like that, where you've got a lump sum of money or a chunk of money that you can use in retirement, really does provide a pretty good supplement. And in the case of most folks that don't have pensions anymore, that amount of money that you're saving in that employer retirement plan becomes the single biggest amount of money available to then turn around and generate out for you income on a monthly basis. So first and foremost, it's certainly a great supplement, and it may be a large part of your retirement when you get there in terms of providing income. Number two, it's tax advantage. And here, in most cases, whether it's a 401k, 403b, or deferred comp, you actually get the option of being able to have your choice of how you want the tax savings. So if you decide on the traditional route, then you're going to save money on your taxes now because that's pre-tax, and then when you take it out in retirement, it is taxable. So that's one option you've got on the tax advantage aspect of it. The other part, the Roth, is another option where you pay the taxes now, and then when you spend it in retirement, then you don't have to pay the taxes. So those two options are available to you. So you get your pick of what tax advantage you want. If you're in a lower income tax bracket, then certainly that may make the Roth more sense to you. If you're in a higher tax bracket, or maybe if your spouse works, pushing your total income up to a pretty decent level, then you may want those tax savings now. Either way, contributing to an employer plan has some tax advantages, and these days you actually get to pick how you want those tax advantages. So that's obviously a good feature of employer plans that is still present, whether it's a pandemic or not. And then, of course, you do have your choice of investments inside your employer plan. The downside on this is that most of these plans have gone to very cookie cutter type options in terms of the investment options. A lot of things have become more target date oriented, meaning that depending upon the year that you select, that determines the underlying investment allocation. So the further out you go, obviously, the more of the allocation is on the stock side versus the bond side. The closer years, like a 2020 fund or something like that, is going to be much more heavier on the bond side of things. Be aware that those funds have a tendency to get heavier on the bond side, i.e. become more conservative a little bit earlier than most people sort of realize based upon the underlying mix. So we encourage you to kind of really drill down a little bit more on those target date funds and ultimately have a better insight into what exactly the underlying asset mix is in one of those target date funds, because you may be surprised. You may find that it's a more on the bond heavy. The other thing that we would counsel folks to look at as well is the domestic versus international mix on those. Sometimes you'll see that on some of these target dates where the international component is maybe 30 or 40%. We think that may be too high in today's world. So again, sort of know what you own, but drill down a little bit past the label to make sure. So if you're going to use the investment options that are available in your employer plan, that's great because they've got a list of options, but just take a moment, and if you're going to go with a little bit more of that cookie cutter approach, make sure you kind of have an understanding of exactly what that underlying mix looks like. And then next is you've got better access to this money in retirement than perhaps you realize. If you, for example, have a deferred compensation account, you can get that money at any point without a penalty for early withdrawal. If you're under 59 and a half, you've got to be aware of when you use that money that there could possibly be a 10% tax penalty. That's why it's really specifically earmarked for retirement. You really want to have that be for retirement, and so that's why that age and sort of that tax penalty kicks into play. But there are a lot of exceptions to that early withdrawal penalty, things like first-time home purchase, things like medical expenses, those types of options. And in today's world, during as a result of the COVID pandemic, there's actually an exemption from that tax penalty if you do need to access that money at any point in time. And so that the COVID pandemic exception really does provide a much greater accessibility. You can get up to $100,000 without the 10% penalty, and you can, in fact, if you want, replace that money or pay the taxes out over a 3-year period of time. So even the pandemic has really generated a whole nother category of exceptions that you can access that money even before retirement. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, why you should continue contributing to your employer plan. The reality is that these times will pass and you will eventually retire. And the reality is it will be much faster and quicker than you realize. 10 years or so seems like a long time, but it's only 260 paychecks. 20 years, you get 5 presidential elections, 10 congressional elections. I mean, these times move very quickly, and history tells us that it is time in the market, not timing, that produces the best possible investment results. So if you want to bolster your retirement, save taxes, there's no better option than your employer plan, even during times of a pandemic. We'll be back after these messages here on Dollars and Cents with your host Joel Garris on News Radio WFLA Orlando 96.9 The Game. Welcome back to Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions that have anything to do with your dollars. We're Central Florida's longest running radio program, heard live every Sunday morning on the News Radio Orlando network, along with 96.9 The Game. We're also one of the top 25 financial planning podcasts on the World Wide Web. Just crossed the threshold of 10,000 downloads for our podcast, so pretty exciting about that. My name is Joel Garris. I am a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary with Nelson Financial Planning, where our team of certified financial fiduciaries helps you change your life with a successful financial plan that provides you with peace of mind for the future. So are you like me? Do you have like gift cards that you've gotten for your birthday or for Christmas, and you always sort of forget to bring them to the store, and then they just kind of sit, or they may go into a drawer or into a sock drawer or into a desk drawer, and you sort of forget about them? Well, the point of this segment is to encourage you to rifle through your sock drawer, because COVID has really shifted the retail landscape. And despite one of the strongest holiday season periods last year, the reality is that most retail stores experienced a same-store decline in terms of sales. Why? Well, that's because everything's available on the internet, and that trend was certainly a trend that retail stores were confronting on a regular basis, even leading up to the COVID pandemic. But the pandemic, and obviously the orders to keep everything closed, certainly accelerated that trend much more than anybody could have imagined. And so now we're just beginning to see the fallout on retail stores that are not even going to really reopen. I mean, there's a number of them that have already announced that they're not going to be able to come back. We expect that rate of retail store closures and retail restaurants to continue to jump dramatically. Our office is in Winter Park, close to Winter Park Village, and as I drove through there to get a cup of coffee the other day, I noticed right next to each other there was a Brio's and a Pier 1. Brio's not open, closed. Pier 1 going out of business. That's the kind of thing that is happening across the landscape. It's taking the trend that was already out there and really accelerating it pretty dramatically, because the reality is the consumer basically wants three things now. They want diversity, they want convenience, and they want low price. And that's a hard combination to get when you are limited in a brick and mortar location, right? You can't have unlimited amounts of goods. You can't keep lowering the price because you've got a massive amount of overhead that you've got to be able to do. And certainly you may be convenient in that the consumer can drive to you, but you're not as convenient as picking up the cell phone and clicking on a few buttons to buy whatever it is that you want. So I think from a brick and mortar perspective, either you've got to go big or you've got to go small. Unfortunately, that means there's not a whole lot of room for the middle. So what does that mean? The big, think about your super centers, your warehouse clubs, things like that. Obviously there, they can meet those three things, right? They've got a lot to offer. It's convenient, and there's lower price as well. On the flip side, your smaller stores might be smaller in size, but perhaps they have quick inventory turns, such as some of these off-price stores where you've got high quality designer goods that may be out of season or overstocked. And you can make it an experience for the customer, sort of a treasure hunt of sorts that will allow those types of companies to be more likely to survive. Certainly in the past, with their easy access to capital and low financing costs, it really sort of kept a lot of these stores that perhaps maybe weren't doing that well open. But I think the COVID pandemic and the stay-at-home orders is certainly rejiggering that, so that you're going to see a big difference in terms of who survives and who ultimately does not. So what do you do with that, right? The reality is that you've got to check those sock drawers. You've got to check those desk drawers, because if you've got a gift card and the location or the business to which you've got that gift card goes out of business, then that gift card is no longer any good. I mean, if it's a $25 gift card and it's to a store or a restaurant that goes out of business, that's the same thing as taking a 20 and a 5 out of your wallet and just striking a match to it. So really dig into it. It's an exercise that I did this past week, and lo and behold, I found a gift card to a restaurant that had already announced that it was going out of business. So my wife and I scrambled. We're like, okay, we're going to go have dinner or order takeout from this place so that we don't just throw money away. So we encourage you to take a moment and do that. You may be very surprised to see what you find. The reality is that if you've got a gift card to a store that isn't going to reopen, then that is money that is lost, and you're not going to be able to recoup that. So make sure you double check those stock drawers, because the retail landscape is changing. It's going to change like we've never seen before. Dramatic shifts. We're already seeing it. I mean, just in my little drive over to get my coffee this past week, there were 2 different locations that had either closed or were in the process of going out of business. Premium space stores over at the Winter Park Village, which is close to our office, that were basically not reopening. So bottom line, check those sock drawers, and definitely make sure that you don't have a gift card to a store that will no longer be there. That would be the very definition of you holding the bag, so to speak. So don't do that. Run that exercise. I did this past week, was surprised to find one that, hey, we need to go use this. Otherwise, we're just throwing money away. And let's face it, that's not making sense with your dollars if you do that, right? So make sure you double check that. If you find one, I would encourage you to go out and use it this week, because you just don't know what the week after next looks like. So if you find it, use it, treat yourself, and don't let it go to waste. So another thing that happened this past week was the folks in Washington, shockingly, actually got together to pass another piece of legislation. And one of the things that has surprised us to no end is during the course of this COVID pandemic, the folks in Washington, despite it being a presidential election year, despite it being high political acrimony across the boards, that they're actually getting stuff done. And that, folks, is in stark contrast to what happened back in the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Those folks couldn't pass legislation to save themselves, but this time they are passing it at such a rapid rate. It really is kind of surprising. So last week they passed the Payroll Protection Plan Flexibility Act, and so that had a lot of features in it that ultimately makes those businesses that took a payroll protection loan and want the full forgiveness on that loan. That act actually clarifies a lot of the outstanding issues that were involved with that, and ultimately gives them businesses a little bit more flexibility in order to get the highest level of loan forgiveness under the payroll protection plan. So we're going to talk more in detail about that. But first, we'll take a break. And so when we come back, we'll talk about some of the features of the Payroll Protection Plan Flexibility Act that passed this past week, and why that's important to you and to your employer. All that when we get back here on Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense of all life's decisions involving your dollars. Back to Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. My name is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning, where our team of certified financial fiduciaries stands ready to help you change your life through a successful financial plan that provides you with peace of mind for the future. On this segment of the program, we're going to talk a little bit about the latest bill that came out of Washington that ultimately refined a lot of the components of the payroll protection plan. That was the part of the CARES Act that provided loans to small businesses so that they could meet their payroll, particularly during periods of time where they were either closed or they were ramping up. Now, as a condition to that, you actually had to keep your employees. So a lot of the loan forgiveness aspects of the payroll protection plan had to deal with keeping people on board as employees continuing to pay them. But if you did that, you would find that the loan that you got would actually be forgiven. So it wouldn't be a loan, it would in fact be a grant. So a lot of businesses took advantage of that, but in the CARES Act, there wasn't a whole lot of parameters put in place on that. And so what then began happening is the folks at Treasury, the folks in the Internal Revenue Service, folks at SBA started to then sort of make some rules on it. And the reality is that it needed additional clarification by Congress, by the folks in Washington. So they actually managed to accomplish that this past week, despite it being a presidential election year and all the acrimony in Washington. They actually did pass the Payroll Protection Plan Flexibility Act. And so in this segment, we're going to talk a lot about what that brought into the table and how that changed things. So again, the loan was set up so that it could be forgiven if you put it towards payroll. What originally was stipulated is that you had to use it during the course of an 8-week period of time. That 8-week period of time had to be by June the 30th. So what this new act did is it actually made it a little bit easier, a little bit more flexible, because the reality is that a lot of businesses are just beginning to open up. So it's hard to bring back employees and then be able to use that loan to pay for employees' salary if you're just reopening. And particularly, here in Florida, we are certainly one of the earlier states in terms of reopening. There are many states that haven't really even started that process that much. So as you can imagine, June 30th, that deadline coming up hard, that makes it much more difficult for those businesses in those states to get the full benefit of the loan forgiveness on these payroll protection plan loans. So what this act did was it wound up extending that 8-week period out to 24 period, because that prior period obviously was just a little bit too short. It also shifted the date of when you sort of had to use it from June 30th out to December 31. So a lot more flexibility, a lot greater likelihood that folks are going to be able to use that loan, or businesses are going to be able to use that loan to meet payroll, and most importantly, get that loan forgiven. The original allocation between how much of that loan you had to use for payroll costs was 75%. You can only use 25% for non-payroll costs like utilities and rent and things like that. That also changed to make it a little bit more flexible for employers who got the loan to get the full loan forgiveness. They actually shifted that ratio away from 75-25 over to 60-40. So now you can use up to 40% for utilities and rent and things like that. and still get the full amount of the loan forgiveness. So a little bit more flexibility in how you can use the money. Don't have to use, you can use a little bit more for things like utilities and rent and the like. And then, as we mentioned earlier, they of course changed the date. You don't have to use this all by June 30th. You get up to December 31 to be able to use it. That, I think, is a really key provision as you see different states having different periods of time and different timetables in terms of what's reopening and how things are reopening. Certainly pretty important to be able to have a little bit more expanded window, not just in terms of the number of weeks, but in terms of the calendar year, in terms of when you have to use it. So bottom line, it's 24 weeks versus 8. You can use it by December 31 instead of June 30. And the ratio, instead of it being 75%, 25%, it's now 60% for employee wages, 40% now that can be used for rent and utilities and things like that. And then there's also some more details that they put in to help provide some clarity to the payroll protection plan loans. If you're unable to restore to your original workforce numbers, or if folks don't want to come back, or if your business has been fundamentally altered as a result of the COVID pandemic, then there's some exceptions that allow you to still get that loan forgiveness if you're in one of those categories. It also extended out the repayment term. So let's say you're not going to be eligible to get the full forgiveness on this, then it becomes a loan. After all, that's the reality of it. It is a loan, but it is forgiven if you meet certain parameters. So your ability, if you're not able to get full forgiveness and it is a loan, then you now can repay that loan over 5 years rather than 2 years. Interest rate still stands at 1%, so that's good. And then if you were a borrower previously, you were not able to delay the payroll taxes. You are able to do that now. So the only big outstanding item on all of this is that a double deduction argument that is happening between the IRS and Congress. The IRS has said, look, if it's a loan and it gets forgiven, then that's fine. You don't have to count that as income, which is what you would traditionally have to do. But you don't get to also then write off the expenses that you use that loan to pay. You don't also get to write those expenses off as business deductions. The folks in Congress said, well, wait a minute, that was kind of the intent. We kind of wanted that double deduction to be able to give folks an opportunity to really benefit from the loan. So that issue still remains of whether, if you get the loan forgiven, whether you're also going to be able to deduct the expenses that you used the loan for. So stay tuned on that part. As it stands right now, the IRS's position would be the position you'd have to follow, whereby you don't get to also then deduct those expenses. So certainly may see more of that. I certainly don't think the actions out of Washington are complete by any stretch of the imagination, because the reality is there's much more uncertainty over this COVID pandemic. And so I would expect to see continued legislation out of Washington to help provide some clarity to some of these programs. So we are going to wrap it up and get on out of here. Thank you for listening to Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. Our team of certified financial fiduciaries at Nelson Financial Planning stands ready to help you change your life this week with a successful financial plan that provides you with peace of mind for the future. Thanks for listening to the program.